We're going to go through our camera settings in this module so you know the baseline with all the photos that we're going to start deconstructing later on in the course. And we'll go through this really quickly. So first up, we make sure all our cameras are set up for RAW. All right. Hopefully all of you shoot RAW. The end files you have so much more potential with when you shoot RAW. So we shoot RAW to the one card slot and we shoot high-res JPEGs to the second card slot. The reason that we don't shoot RAW is this is just extra security for us. We can usually back up multiple weddings in high-res JPEGs on that second card before we have to format it. And we actually have had to use that second card before, use those high-res JPEGs when the other card has become corrupt, and the client's never known any different. So that's first. Second, we shoot everything in manual. And this was a big game changer for us. When we first started out in our photography business, we were more comfortable, or we thought it was easier to shoot in aperture priority. After the first workshop I took, I switched to manual and things changed from there. It made me respond differently to light, especially with my muscle memory. You know, if I was shooting this way and I went from shooting that to this way, which was a different lighting scenario, I was able to adjust just with a roll of my finger, and it sort of became intuitive as opposed to getting my camera to make that adjustment for me. Plus, when we're shooting flash, we have to shoot manual anyways, so it's one less thing we have to think about. That being said, I know so many good photographers that shoot aperture priority and use exposure compensation, and I wouldn't tell them to do differently because they do a superb job. So this one, it's really up to you. Okay, auto white balance. We just leave our camera in auto white balance. It's one less thing we have to think about on the wedding day, simplifies our thinking, and we're shooting RAW anyways, so it doesn't really matter. Back button focus. Most things I can be convinced on, you know, one way or the other. Back button focus, I'll get into a full argument over, because back button focus will change your game as a photographer. There's images that we're going to deconstruct for you later in the course that just would not have been possible with shutter focus. So what back button focus does, for those of you that don't know, is it takes the focus off the shutter finger and moves it to a button in the back of the camera, hence back button focus, right? And then this finger, it simplifies the role of this finger. This finger only has one job. That's your moment finger. That's your moment finger. And then this finger only has one job. That's your focus finger, right? And the next thing I'm going to talk about goes hand in hand with this, and that is center point focus. Okay, so we always have our camera set up in center point focus, and we recompose from there. So it'll look something like this: focus, recompose, focus, recompose, right? And because we're back button focusing, we can focus, recompose, shoot, 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 shoot through the entirety of the moment without having to regain focus again. The other thing this allows us to do is put our 100% attention into the composition, right? We used to use the toggle. The toggle was brutal for two reasons. One, by the time we've composed the image and we get the toggle in the right spot, the moment's over, right? And then number two is that it allows us to take focus completely out of the equation and put all our effort into our composition and watching the edges of our frame, right? When we would compose and then focus, our compositions would suffer, you know, especially the fine, tiny little details like the edges of our frame, right? Whereas when we focus and then compose, our compositions become a lot more intentional and a lot cleaner as a result. So back button focus, you know, it's a bit of a learning curve for sure. It takes probably a wedding or two to get used to it, but it'll change your photography game. You will get way more moments, you'll get way more creative compositions, and you'll have way more opportunities. So just trust me on this one. Okay, so next one is eye detect focus. And this is something I just started using once we got the Sony A9, and it's actually changed the way we shoot and compose a little bit. So I've got it set up, and I'll show you this in the following video, but I've got it set up on a button right beside my back button focus. So if I want a back button focus, center, I press that, Whereas if I've got a lot of faces in the frame and I want it to lock onto somebody's eye, I can just press the eye detect focus and it locks onto those eyes. And if I hold it down, it tracks those eyes if they're moving towards me or if they're moving away from me. It's an unbelievable system. Um, it also works really well like for the processional, or I guess it would be the recessional, right? When the couple are coming back down the aisle and we're following them backwards, we often have our flip screen up and we're shooting from the hip, right? And if we use that eye detect focus, it tracks their eyes the whole way down the aisle. So that's a big game changer. Okay, ISO. Never auto ISO, at least not for the way we shoot. Okay, so this is the first decision we make when we walk into a room. What's the ISO? And we basically don't change it until we change lighting scenarios. And we'll usually try and set it for the darkest area of the room. So once we set our ISO for a room, we don't have to adjust it. We're not afraid at all to push our ISO up to 6400 and above, especially with the Sonys. So once we've made that decision, we don't think about it again until we change scenarios. Then we select our aperture, right? And that's our storytelling device. And as Lanny mentioned, we used to default to shooting wide open, probably just because we were lazy and we didn't know any better. But we've realized there's this whole world, this whole beautiful, wonderful world beyond f2.8. So I would say our default nowadays is probably about f4, and we'll go up from there if we're trying to layer more stories together, and we'll go down from there if we're really trying to isolate something. And then the last decision we make is our shutter speed, right? And the shutter speed, we're adjusting on the fly to get the exposure that we're looking for. And that's our camera settings. And in the next video, I'm going to break down exactly how we set up the A9.